There's a lot of propaganda floating around right now designed to make you uncomfortable eating meat, really designed to get you feeling guilty about eating red meat, because the system in general right now is focused on convincing you voluntarily to consume less meat. They have to do it voluntarily first before they try to figure out how to institute measures that would actually be legal to get you to eat less meat voluntarily, or involuntarily rather. So we're in the voluntary stage of this movement. In the voluntary stage of it is characterized by propaganda. Meat bad, meat bad, meat bad. Meat bad for your health, meat bad for the planet, meat bad. Stop eating meat. That's the message. And it's really about as brain dead as I just characterized it, because at the end of the day, it's dumb. Human beings eat meat. We thrive and are at our best when we eat meat. We know this. We see this in the amount of metabolic issues and diseases that seem to have been remedied by people reducing their carbohydrates to as close to zero as they can manage, whether that's through a ketogenic diet or a carnivore diet or something in between. People thrive on this diet. And we're now seeing coming out of the woodwork lots and lots of people who've spent many decades on a carnivore diet, many of them looking decades younger than their calendar years would indicate. But the propaganda is very real, driven by people who are true believers in what I generally refer to as the thermometer problem. They fully believe the propaganda that despite the fact that only 5% of the carbon that's put out there is caused by animal husbandry, they still believe that it is a major driver in the thermometer problem. And that's a really kind of funny thing, because even if for the sake of the argument we accept their entire narrative, the biggest drivers of that would be transportation and energy production, and they're not willing to have the conversation about nuclear energy. They're just not willing to. So they focus instead on animal agriculture. It's a problem, it's a solution that's not going to work for the problem they profess. I don't actually think they believe their own propaganda, not the people really behind everything, that there's something else going on. But they are hitting us with propaganda, and they're doing it very effectively. Case in point, there's an article from the New York Post that just made me laugh. It gives us this headline: just 12% of Americans, mostly men, are eating half of our beef supply. New research. So this thing focused on one day of eating, right? Random day they chose, one day, and they found that like 12% of Americans eat all the beef. Now, if that's actually accurate, if their research were to actually stand up to scrutiny, which it doesn't, I would say we need to bump those numbers up. 12% of Americans eat half the beef? Those are rookie numbers, folks. We got to bump those numbers up. We have to remind people that one of America's great products is beef. We're known as a beef-producing country. We make some of the best beef in the world, so much so that we export all of our finest beef and feed our population lesser beef. When you look at the import-export numbers, it will make your head spin. But it's only 12% of Americans, according to this, and that's ridiculous. Americans eat mostly chicken, which is unfortunate. I like chicken as much as the next person, but beef is vastly superior in every way imaginable. But here's the takeaway from the article. Quote, "Where's the beef? In America, it's getting scarfed up by a small minority of people. A new study reveals that 50% of the beef consumed in any given day goes to just 12% of the population. And this heavy consumption of beef has significant health impacts on those Americans who are eating half of our steaks, meatballs, wieners, and hamburgers. Current U.S. Department of Agriculture guidelines suggest eating 4 ounces per day of meat, poultry, and eggs for those consuming 2,200 calories per day. But the study reveals some Americans are far exceeding that amount. The USDA reports Americans overall consumed a whopping 30 billion pounds of beef in 2021, which equals almost 60 pounds per person per year. The researchers were surprised such a small percentage of people consume such an outsized proportion of beef. Study author Dr. Diego Rose, Nutrition Program Director at Tulane University School of Public Health and Tropical Medicine, said in a news release, "We focused on beef because of its impact on the environment and because it's high in saturated fat, which is not good for your health," Rose said. End quote. Nonsense upon nonsense upon nonsense, but what do you expect? Now, that article was really pretty funny by itself, but it did remind me of this gem here. And this comes from last summer, just over a year ago. It's an article from Scientific American. It gives us this headline: Eating too much protein makes pee a problem pollutant in the U.S. Protein-packed diets add excess nitrogen to the environment through urine, rivaling pollution from agricultural fertilizers. Did these people ever look at where the actual, one of the major problems that no one's going to talk about in the water supply comes from? And that is the appearance of estrogen in the water. If you look at where that comes from, it is a much bigger problem with much larger potential impacts. But here they're talking about excess nitrogen. You've been hearing a lot in the media, by the way, especially internationally, of them trying to reduce nitrogen pollution, as they call it, or nitrogen emissions. And the only way they can do that is to reduce even plant agriculture. This is misanthropic stuff they're doing here. But here, this was shared on Instagram by an account called food.lies. I suggest you follow them. This article is incredible. And here we get the punchline to this. Quote, "Many people think we need to all switch to becoming vegetarians. Obviously, that's not practical. That's not something that is really ever going to happen," Gilbert says. Rather than cutting out any foods entirely, she suggests consumers could switch to a Demetarian diet, an approach that focuses on reducing the consumption of meat and dairy, which currently makes up about 2/3 of the protein eaten in the U.S. Enjoy your steak, enjoy your burger, but go modest on your meat consumption in your following meal, she says. End quote. Again, nonsense upon nonsense upon nonsense. And it's this kind of nonsense that we are dealing with here. They don't want to admit that what they're trying to do is to get people to stop eating meat. But if you look at, like, Dr. Sean Baker has been covering this very well on his channel where he does his short form videos. And you've got the C40 issue, which I covered in a video last week. We have these cities from around the world have agreed to, in a compact that they've signed, to reduce the amount of emissions they put out, which is their prerogative, I guess. But one of the ways they want to do it is by reducing meat consumption in their cities. How you're going to do that in America, I don't know, because you're getting into international trade and interstate commerce, and the courts will have a field day when they come try to do that. But they've agreed by 2050 or 2060 to reduce it by 60%. Meat consumption by 60% by mid-century. I don't know how they're going to do that legally. Maybe they're not that concerned about how they're going to do it legally. And so you get the propaganda, the Demetarian diet. This is the first time I've heard that term, and it's not one that's going to carry on, because what they want is a more plant-based diet. That's where we're at right now, a more plant-based diet. And that's partially the reason they're using that kind of approach instead of you've got to give up meat entirely. It's because they're seeing all those Beyond patties and all that fake meat in the grocery store not really getting bought. My wife and I always have a good laugh whenever we go to like Sam's Club or Costco and we see the big case of Beyond Burgers and the giant, the 40-pack of hamburger patties, because that section is always fuller than the rest, without fail. But I see those patties also. Now, this fake meat's sold in even like rural grocery stores now, but there are always more of them than anything else. And when you talk to the guys who work in the meat department, they say they're told they have to sell it and that they don't sell very much of it. So I don't know what's really going on with it, but right now we're in the propaganda phase. What do you expect will come after the propaganda phase? Do you expect coercion, or do you expect that the propaganda phase is going to be just laughed off the way we laugh it off now? Let me know what you think is coming next in the comments. And let me know what you think about the pee in the water problem and the 12% of people eat all the red meat in the U.S. problem. Think we need to bump those numbers up? Let me know in the comments, please. Hit like and subscribe if you haven't. It does help. And sharing this on social media helps too. I'm Anthony Stine, the Practical Carnivore, and thanks for tuning in.